you see politicians talking about the Commerce Clause. And that's why they want to regulate our light bulbs. They want us to use CFL light bulbs. You break one of the light bulbs, you end up with contaminants. Supposedly you have to call in the EPA, which also is unconstitutional. The Commerce Clause in its original intent, and you have to read the Federalist Papers, number 22, 42, 44, 56, discuss this function or role, which is an enumerated function, as to ensuring there were no taxes on goods sent from New York to Jersey. No good taxes on stuff sent from Jersey to Philadelphia. That was the original intent. Now, Madison's records support that too. He kept a separate set of records, a separate diary, and it supports what was said in the Federalist Papers. There was no intent 200 and some years ago for the Commerce Clause for a small number of men and women in Washington, D.C. to dictate what kind of light bulb you can buy or what kind of health care you choose. That was not the original intent, and it is a violation of their oath. If we can get enough support, I say we start impeaching. If we impeach all 435 of them plus Barack Obama, good. All right? Now, the Supreme Court led the way in the downfall. Most people are sort of disillusioned. Most people say, well, you know, it was FDR. Well, FDR did try shoving things through the system. Franklin Delano Roosevelt used the IRS to attack people. Franklin Delano Roosevelt used the court system to attack people. People that wrote negative editorials against Franklin Delano Roosevelt all of a sudden found themselves in 10-year legal battles and bankrupt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a very bad guy. And if you read his biography, it expires, he pronounces his admiration for Mussolini and Hitler. Command-controlled economy. So truly, you can look at Franklin Delano Roosevelt as our first, truthfully, socialist president. He used the strength of the presidency and the fact that he commanded the military to intimidate the Supreme Court. Pass a bill, Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional, they passed a bill again, say it's unconstitutional, a third time through, he'd go in and say, better not declare this one unconstitutional, you know I'm commander-in-chief. All right. Read the history books, it's out there. Okay? The problem is that the Supreme Court kowtowed. I don't know, because I wasn't there, if it was cowardice, I tend to think that's what it was, or that these were people that admired Mussolini as well. Wickard was a guy that grew a lot of wheat. Farm Bill back in the 1930s gave permission to the federal government to establish quotas on what you could grow. Wickard says, well, I need to grow some for my own cattle, and I need to grow wheat for my own bread, and I'm not going to sell it. I'm just growing it on my land, and we're going to consume it on my land. It's not going to be sold. Federal government sued him anyway. Federal government tried confiscating his farm and taking away his wealth. They said, you're in violation of the United States Farm Act, in violation of the Commerce Clause. Well, wrong answer. The original intent was not allowing tolls between the states. So the Supreme Court sided with the socialists against the people as far back as 1942. And those extra acreages of wheat were considered violation of this federal law simply because it imbalanced the amount of food that was out there. Do you know the 1930s was the very first time in American history we had to import food? Because the government screwed up the quotas so bad, people were going hungry because they were following federal quotas. Now, another major thing, welfare clause. You cannot understand the American Constitution fully unless you get a dictionary that was written back in 1820 or 1810 or 1800. And if you look up the words welfare in the dictionary, a goodness of feeling has nothing to do with a check to bank once a month. Nothing. Zero. And if you read the Federalist Paper number 14, reinforced in 27, 39, 45, and 84, same thing. It was merely that in concert with the laws they make and in concert with the enumerated powers, it was supposed to be for the welfare, in other words, the goodness of the people. Now, let me read to you, James Madison wrote, in reference to the General Welfare Clause. If Congress can do whatever in their discretion can be done by money and will promote the general welfare, the government is not longer a limited one, possessing enumerated powers, but an indefinite one subject to particular exceptions. With respect to the words general welfare, I have always regarded them as qualified by the detail of powers connected with them. To take them in a literal and unlimited sense would be a metamorphosis of the Constitution into a character which there is a host of proofs not contemplated by its creators. It's the guy that wrote the Constitution. Clear as a bell. Totally prostituted by our government. It's wrong. So, if you take a look at the former one, you take a look at this one, there are two clauses of the U.S. Constitution that are totally prostituted by Washington, D.C. for their own benefit. And then you look at taxation clause and property clause, nothing justified being able to do it on things that were not enumerated. So let me explain enumerated. Nowhere in the Constitution do I see anything that says energy. Nowhere in the Constitution do I see anything that says education. Nowhere in the Constitution do I see anything that says medical care. Yet these are the three top planks of the Obama administration. Energy, education, and healthcare. Not enumerated functions of the Constitution. Time for impeachment. We just need to find some people on the other side of the aisle that actually grow a pair. We need to find some congressmen that actually have some level of testosterone, and I don't care if it's Michelle Bachmann. She's got guts. She's the only congressman that actually submitted a proposed balanced budget amendment, and she's trying to get people behind it to try to correct this problem. The problem also is at state level. At the time these violations of our Constitution were occurring, the states were asleep. Our governors and our state legislators should have been protecting us from the federal government. What'd they do? They kowtowed to the federal government. So the governors were complicit in this. And why were they complicit in it? Because Franklin Delano Roosevelt took federal money and shoved it into the states during election time. So every one of those governors knew that if they played ball with the big-time socialists, they would receive federal money, which would help them get reelected. There's a party boss system. Sad but true statement of American history. Now, the same held true with Idi Amin. The same held true with Baby Doc of these two-bit dictatorships. Are we saying that we want to be like that? I don't think so. All right? Now, LBJ, a little-known fact, Lyndon Baines Johnson was actually an aide and an intern in Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration. So he grew his teeth under the big socialist number one. Then when he became president, he implemented socialist ideas, as did Franklin Delano Roosevelt, stating, which ended up displacing community-based anti-poverty programs, which were based both on like small townships, small volunteer organizations, and the church. And that's very critical when you go back to those Judeo-Christian values. Displace them and instead read the word federal housing, federal food, federal education, federal health care through Medicaid and Medicare. And all of us sit in this room know that nothing's free. You know, when Mr. Obama got on the TV and said, this medical program will cover 30 million people who are not covered and not raise an extra cost to the middle class. Nonsense. Nonsense. Nothing is free. Now, my study of the American Constitution is that none of these departments were authorized by a constitutional amendment. Not one. Okay? So if you look at agriculture, education, energy, Health and Human Services is the organization that administers Medicare and Medicaid, and Obamacare eventually. Housing Urban Development is the organization that has misspent money to the tune of billions of dollars on public housing. You know, when I was growing up in Chicago, I want to make it real clear. My mom was extremely poor, raised 4 kids alone on $1 an hour salary. I got a lot of respect for the lady. She was too proud to take government handouts. She raised 4 little kids, hungry mouths to feed, on $1 an hour plus tips. All right? Yet, right down the street, the government was building skyscrapers for people to move in rent-free. Now, the thought passed her mind a couple of times, well, maybe we should live in this free public housing. But she always said, you know, nothing's free. I'm not going to do it. And God bless her soul. All right? So you take a look at those kinds of things. Department of Labor, hey, how much unemployment do we have? Labor's doing a real good job, eh? Okay, Department of Transportation. The original highway system was established under the Department of Defense because the original interstate system was for us to move armies to the West Coast to repel the Japanese or to the East Coast to repel the Nazis, if that should occur again. That's why we have an interstate system. It was not for the luxury of the federal government to come in and start manipulating speed, price of gasoline, and that type of thing. You take a look at your gas prices. I mean, 50% of what you pay at the pump is tax. 50%. All right? And how's those streets? How's those potholes? It doesn't appear that what they're taking in from gasoline is being spent on the roads. FEMA. FEMA to me is one of the most egregious, right along with the EPA, simply because the Federal Emergency Management Agency was created by Jimmy Carter's signature. No, it didn't go through Congress, and it didn't go through a congressional amendment. So here's a president of the United States thinking that he was the legislative branch. Created from scratch. And then the Congress violated the separation of powers because in the next federal funding cycle, they authorized money for it. Folks, I tell you, if I was a congressman, I'd say, A, you just violated the Constitution. B, you're not getting a penny. That's why right now it's absolutely critical. Call your congressman, call your senator, call your governor to call people in D.C. and tell them Libya is wrong. We don't have a declaration of war. Why are you supporting it? If you don't follow the Constitution, we have a dictatorship. All right? Now, if you add together the spending of each of these departments and agencies, it comes to over $1 trillion per year. Did you know that? $1 trillion per year. Now, what I did is I added all the way across here, 2009. If you go all the way across, you can see right here in 2009, which was my data cutoff for the book, $1,097 billion on those departments which are not constitutionally authorized. You know we'd have a balanced budget today if we got rid of the stuff that was not authorized? Today. Now. I mean, you know, like quitting time. You know, it's Miller time. Let's go spend some money on beer, you know? I'm going to break down the Health and Human Services because that's been such a big topic of conversation with Obamacare. You know, obviously TARP, bailouts, cap and trade, cash for clunkers, none of that's in the Constitution. None of it. Where in the Constitution does it say that they can collect money from all of us and give it to someone else to buy a Japanese car? And you know, 70% of the cars bought under the Cash for Clunkers program were Japanese. They weren't even American built. I think that's amazing. I mean, it's bad enough they violate the Constitution, but at the same time they're shoveling money overseas. All right, but here's the medical facts. In 1964, the budget was $4.6 billion for the war against poverty, and LBJ was telling us within 10 years we'll have no more poor. How's that going for you? At 9-some% unemployment and about 18% underemployment today. Yet LBJ said, oh yeah, by the early 70s there won't be any more poor in the United States. Wrong answer. So $4.6 billion per year. If you divided it by the number of people in the United States back then, it came to $24 per capita. Now, in fairness, we do have inflation. So if we were spending today what we were spending then, we would have to appropriate almost $32 billion. That's based on inflation. And what did we do last year? $132 billion. It was $780 billion. Now, if you do the math on that, population increased 58%, spending increased 10,000%. This one slide is proof positive that the federal government should not be involved in health care. You cannot have a 58% increase in population and a 10,000% increase in spending. You can't do it. No nation on earth could survive those numbers. Not even for a year. All right? Now, Congressional Budget Office projections 2009 were $677 billion. And as I said, it turned into $780 billion. So their projection was low. Congressional Budget Office for 2019 is $1.2 trillion per year. That's not one time, that's every year. And guaranteed, if they are almost $100 billion short here, they'll be several $100 billion short there. This one slide right here says don't do Obamacare.